Learning objective number 2 is to prepare a report showing revenue and spending variances. A revenue variance is the difference between what the total revenue should have been, given our actual level of activity for the period, and our actual total revenue. A spending variance is the difference between how much a cost should have been, given the actual level of activity, and the actual amount of the cost. So again, our revenue and spending variances are simply the difference between our flexible budget amounts and our actual amounts. Let's go ahead now and use our flexible budget that we prepared for Larry's lawn service to calculate our revenue and spending variances. Again, our revenue and spending variances are simply the difference between our flexible budget amounts and our actual results. For revenues, our actual revenues of $43,000 were $1,750 higher than our flexible budget amount, or what we would have expected, given that we cut 550 lawns. Since our revenues are higher than expected, given our actual level of results, we would refer to this as a favorable variance. If we look closer and calculate our average cost or average revenue per lawn by taking our actually $43,000 in revenue and dividing it by our actual number of lawns of 550, we see that we earn $78.18 on average per lawn. Compared to our flexible budget amount, we had anticipated only charging our customers $75 a lawn. Since our revenue per lawn was higher than our expected revenue per lawn, we have a favorable revenue variance. Our spending variances are the difference between our actual expenses and the expenses we would have budgeted with our flexible budget had we anticipated cutting 550 lawns. Notice we have unfavorable variances if our actual expenses are higher than the budgeted amount, and we have favorable variances if our actual costs are lower than our flexible budget amounts. Let's take a closer look and see why these would be favorable or unfavorable. Let's consider our gasoline expense. If we take our actual gasoline expense of $5,100 and divide it by the 550 lawns we cut, we see that on average we spent $9.27 per lawn. Before we prepared our budget, we only anticipated spending $9 per lawn. So we have an unfavorable variance because our actual cost ended up being higher than we would have anticipated. Let's go ahead now and look at maintenance and equipment. If we take the $1,300 actual cost and divide it by 550 lawns, we see that on average it only cost us $2.36 per lawn. We had anticipated spending $3 on average per lawn. So since our actual cost was less than our flexible budget amounts, we have a favorable variance. Overall, our expense variance was unfavorable. Our actual expenses of $36,550 were higher than our flexible budget amount of $34,600. In terms of net operating income, we had a $200 unfavorable variance because our actual net operating income for cutting 550 lawns was lower than we would have anticipated, which should have been $6,650. Let's go ahead now and work through another example and calculate some spending and revenue variances. Kilsing Ostera farms and sells oysters in the Pacific Northwest. The company harvested and sold 8,000 pounds of oysters in August. The company's flexible budget for August appears below, along with actual results. Let's prepare a report showing the company's revenues and spending variances for the month of August. Our revenue variance is $3,200. That's the difference between our actual amount of $35,200 and our flexible budget amount of $32,000. We say that this is a favorable variance since our actual revenues are more than our flexible budget. For packing supplies, the difference between our actual expenses of $4,200 and our flexible budget of $4,000 is $200. And since our actual cost or expense was higher, it's an unfavorable variance. For oyster bed maintenance, the variance is $100. And since our actual results are less than our flexible budget amount, it's a favorable variance. For wages and salaries, our actual cost is $340 higher than our flexible budget amount. So we say this is an unfavorable variance. For shipping expenses, our actual costs are $550 higher than our flexible budget. So again, this is an unfavorable variance. For utilities, our actual expenses are $20 less than our flexible budget amount. So we have a favorable variance. For other expenses, our actual expenses are $130 higher than our flexible budget amount. So again, we have an unfavorable variance. Our total expenses are $1,100 higher than our flexible budget, and so we have an unfavorable overall spending variance. In terms of net operating income, our net operating income was $1,200 higher than we would have expected based on 8,000 pounds of oysters, and so we have an overall favorable variance.